Tonight's speaker is an experienced entrepreneur, investor, and advisor with a background spanning nearly 3 decades in sectors like e-commerce, healthcare, and blockchain, AI technology, and clean technology. His political activism ignited in 2008 after his healthcare business suffered due to government regulations. Anybody relate to that? Day has since been deeply involved in various political and nonprofit organizations advocating for freedom and individual liberty. And I believe we are breaking news tonight, being able to announce that Aaron is now, as of now, has become a fellow at the Brownstone Institute. His political journey includes running as an independent for the U.S. Senate and engaging in an extensive political activism, highlighted by his opposition to the Obamacare expansion. His campaign was built on principles of sovereignty, integrity in government, and prioritizing principles over personalities. Day, in fact, ran for president, our second speaker to do so, as we hosted Vivek Ramaswamy during the shutdowns. His intention was to highlight the dangers of central bank digital currencies and is now dedicating 100% of his time to educating people about the perils of CBDC and conducting workshops to combat it. Day's efforts have been recognized in the major news outlets like Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Fox News, although none of them just seem to highlight the great feat of parenting 13-year-old twins. He's the author of The Final Countdown, Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currencies, which will be available here tonight. He will autograph it for you for $20. And Aaron warns of the erosion of personal freedom we face in an ever-digitalized world and sends out a compelling call to action in his guide to understanding and surviving the emerging era of digital control. So, champion of individual autonomy and financial freedom, Aaron Day, show us the money.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm very passionate about this topic and very eager to be able to spread this message wherever I can, and frankly, am very grateful to find a concentration of people that are interested in liberty in Silicon Valley. I'll give you a little bit of my background, but before I do that, I want to discuss what I'm going to touch on here today. First of all, I'm here because I believe CBDCs are the single biggest threat to human liberty. A CBDC is digital money that can be programmed, monitored, and censored by the government. They are the gateway and the control system for social credit scores, vaccine passports, digital IDs, and they are much further along than you can possibly imagine. The technology exists and the political intention to implement it is already there. I don't believe there is a political solution in the near term, and I think there will probably be a CBDC implemented before the 2024 election. Now, my background is I've spent 30 years as an entrepreneur and then became a liberty activist. In fact, my first company I started, we had an office in Redwood City in the late 90s. And then I started a healthcare company in 2004, which was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and the AG's office. So as I like to say, hell hath no fury like an entrepreneur scorned. And that launched my full-time dedication to political activism and the fight for liberty. And in doing this, I've done this in a variety of different capacities. Many instances working with my wife on helping to get candidates elected in the live free or die state of New Hampshire. I got involved in cryptocurrency in 2012. In fact, I learned about cryptocurrency at an event called Liberty Forum in New Hampshire. I'm part of a group called the Free State Project, which is a movement to get 20,000 people to New Hampshire, and Liberty Forum is our flagship event. In 2019, in 2018, I exited politics, and in 2019, I moved completely into crypto, gold, and silver, and exited the dollar. And thinking I was going to pursue kind of an alternative path from the political system. Then a couple of things happened. COVID tyranny happened, And fortunately and thankfully, because of my wife and her involvement in the vaccine choice movement going back to 2008, we were kind of ahead of the curve on that issue. But after the lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, and everything else, I started to think, well, what's causing this? What's the root cause of this tyranny? And then a couple of other things happened. The person who introduced me to Bitcoin, we went to his sentencing hearing. He is now spending 8 years in federal prison for the crime of selling cryptocurrency. Another friend of mine in New Hampshire named Jeremy Kaufman created a service you might have used called Odyssey or Library, LBRY. It is a censorship-resistant version of YouTube. He was targeted for 5 years by the SEC, and his business was destroyed just last year, while I was writing my book, by the way. So I'm sitting here saying, we have COVID tyranny, we have a complete crackdown on crypto. What's causing all of this? And what I realized is there really is a big push towards a one world centralized government, complete digital tyranny, where it's essentially the negation of free will itself. And I realized the crackdown on crypto is there because they have CBDCs sitting right in the wings. So I said, I'm done with entrepreneurship. I'm going to run for president simply to bring awareness to this. I was pretty sure that that wasn't going to gain momentum from a political perspective, but I wanted to do everything I could to get that message out. And fortunately, I've known Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute for over a decade, and our paths have crossed, and so I now have a home within Brownstone, which I think is the best possible platform given the great work they've done on the censorship industrial complex and medical tyranny to push all this forward. So in this presentation, it is not all doom and gloom, but I've moved beyond political activism, and it's all about what we do in terms of changing our own behavior, our own thoughts, our own emotions. This isn't going to be solved with the ballot box. Boycotts work, voting not so much, at least in recent history, and given the urgency of this CBDC issue, I am promoting a solution of moving away from the dollar before it becomes central bank digital currency so that we can continue to exist with liberty outside of this tyrannical structure. So I wrote the book, and there's a lot of material. I will say, the first part of this is a little dark, and it's intentional because I think the threat is that urgent. Some of the stuff I'm going to skip through a little bit just because there's a lot of detail, and so that's in the book, and I'm happy to follow up on that as well. But I'm going to start with a story that's fictional for now. Imagine you're in New York City. It's 2032. We have one global government called the Bureau of Global Nations. Everybody exists with a CBDC, universal basic income, social credit scores, and vaccine passports. It's a complete dystopian nightmare, complete surveillance state. And we have the Johnson family, which is a family of 4, the husband, wife, mother, and daughter. And I'm going to go through this quick scenario here. But at the beginning of the story, the family has a family social credit score, and our fictional family is at the excellent credit tier. So they have a pod, if you will, in a high-rise building, but that's one of the nicer pods. Everybody has their own bedroom, that kind of thing. They have high-speed rail, access to basic health care services, and access to relatively quality education. So we're going to go through a series of events here. The husband, Jason, posts some information on a discussion board about decentralized cryptocurrency. The family's social credit score drops from excellent to fair. His wife sells extra merchandise on eBay and fails to report the taxable income above $600, and now the family's social credit score drops to poor. Next, the daughter uses the wrong pronoun with a professor in college, and now the family's social credit score has dropped to the very poor level. At this new reduced level, the family has a one-room pod, their transportation is downgraded, and their health care is downgraded. To help his family, the father decides he's given the opportunity to join the Medical Assistance in Dying program. He's offered euthanasia and will get extra points if he tries an experimental medication to stop his heart. He goes through with the medication in the trial. Family's social credit score is restored. The son gets addicted to painkillers, dealing with the stress, dies in an accident. Family's social credit score drops again. The daughter suffers an injury from a vaccine, and her GPA slips. Social credit score drops again. And the mother gets caught discussing alternative therapies for vaccine injuries, and the score drops again, leaving the family, what's left of it, wondering if the MAID program is the right option for them. So I do birthday parties as well. I know that sounds extreme, and it sounds, absurd and ridiculous, and I'm trying to summarize a lot in a very short period of time, but the truth is everything that I just mentioned, from the surveillance systems to the social credit scores, even the types of behavior that's penalized, exists in the developed world in some place right now. And I'm going to walk through that. China already has a very sophisticated social credit score system, very similar to how our credit score system works financially. So if you're 850 to 1,000, it's an excellent tier, all the way down to 0 to 299, and that's a very poor score. And these actually vary a little bit from province to province. But China already controls behavior at a very granular level. They have security cameras everywhere, 626 million surveillance cameras in China. Very sophisticated AI. So they will give you rewards for volunteering for community service, making a charitable donation, but they will hit your credit score if you say anything bad about the government, spread false information online, default on a loan, even cheating in a video game. So it's that granular and it's that sophisticated. And it's estimated that, and this data is old, that 23 million people in China are already blacklisted, already at the low social credit score ranking, and already have reduced access to travel and transportation and healthcare and educational services. So this exists, and that data is from 4 years ago, and it's only gotten worse from there. Alex talked about vaccine passports, and you would think after everything that happened with COVID and all of the information that would come out, we learned our lesson. And the opposite is true. They're working on a World Health Organization pandemic accord this year and working towards a global vaccine passport for next year. So Alex is exactly right. What happened in 2020, this is a trial balloon for something that is more sophisticated and more comprehensive to be rolled out, or is being rolled out right now, because and I'll get to some of the specifics of that. The euthanasia part of my fictional story probably seemed like the most absurd element of it, but Canada has a medical assistance in dying program. In 2022, 10,000 people died or were euthanized under that program. They decided to increase the eligibility. So you no longer had to wait 10 days from the time of request to execution, for lack of a better term. You could get a prescription for MAID from any doctor, not just a specialist. So they went from 10,000 people dying in 2022 to 13,241 people last year. 4.1% of all Canadians die from the MAID program. And when you look at these stories, you could say it's compassionate. There's some people that make the argument, well, this is a compassionate way. And I've looked at the videos on YouTube and you see the stories, there are people that because of COVID policies couldn't pay rent, and this was seen as a viable option. There are stories there was this one story of a 21-year-old calling in and saying he was depressed because he couldn't find a girlfriend, and this was offered. I'll give one specific story. There's a woman named Christine Gauthier. She was a paraplegic, and she was a veteran, but she became a Paralympian and really excelled despite her disability. She requested a wheelchair from the Canadian government. And they wrote back, and she testified in front of Parliament and said, if you're so desperate, madam, we can offer you MAID program instead. So this idea, and Canada is very progressive with, well, we saw what they did with the Canadian truckers. They're very much on board with moving at even quicker speed with social credit scores and everything else. It's only a matter of time before where you get your social credit score drops to a certain level and euthanasia is the option. I already mentioned how bad the Chinese surveillance state is. But to me, the 5 scariest words in the English language are, that could never happen in America. Because, I mean, we know what happened with, with the vaccines and with the TikTok dancers and with all the stay-at-home orders and everything else. I remember going to my kids, my 10-year-old daughter's ballet in February in New Hampshire, outside. It's like 20-something degrees. Parents have to social distance. The kids are wearing masks. You can't even see their feet. It was probably the most absurd thing I've ever seen. And they'll do it again. But the truth is that the politicians like to present that China is the enemy and that it's the US versus China. The US is working with China. The technocrats in North America, Europe, and Asia are infiltrating the governments in all 3 of those regions, and they're working together on this. We get half of our surveillance technology from China. So this isn't an us versus them. I mean, all of the people in both countries are getting the same treatment, but this is a coordinated effort. It's kind of like COVID itself. I mean, we were doing bioweapons research with our mortal enemy for 20 years. That seems odd. Snowden warned us. And actually, the Liberty Forum in New Hampshire in 2016, we had Edward Snowden Skype in, and he told us about all of this. This has been going on for a decade. We know about the NSA collecting data on everything from phones to internet data. We know about weakening encryption standards. We know about facial recognition technology. This has been known for a decade. And actually, in part because of some of the work at the Brownstone Institute, and Jay Bhattacharya, as you mentioned, actually, I know this is a big part of the censorship industrial complex, is a big part of Brownstone. We've uncovered just how bad this surveillance state is here and what the coordination is between the FBI, the CIA, and these big technology platforms. And as much as I talked about China having 626 million security cameras, there are 85 million security cameras in the United States. They're adding 100,000 security cameras every day. Our pictures are taken 75 times a day, in addition to whatever pictures we take of ourselves. So I want to make sure people understand, this isn't one of those, we can wait, or that's just China. It's here now. It's been going on. It's been going on right under our noses. In my fictional example, I talked about, the examples of what behaviors caused that family to see their social credit score drop. Well, those behaviors are already being punished. Douglas Mackey was punished and is now spending 7 months in prison for sending out a meme about Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election. We already know the IRS is being weaponized with 87,000 new agents, and so that example of the mother selling things and not reporting it on eBay, that's already here. And there is a pronoun, we already have a pronoun police. There's a New York City human rights law that can fine someone up to $250,000 for using the wrong pronoun. So everything in that fictional scenario is here. There is an upbeat part, we're getting to it. All right, quick show of hands. Do you believe there's a plan for one world tyranny? All right, well, this is a smart group. This will be a faster part of this. You'd be surprised. I've talked to groups where, people are like, no, that's nuts, that's a conspiracy theory, which, as I'll show, is clearly not the case, provably not the case. To me, the battle right now is between a world based on centralization, determinism, and fear, or decentralization, free will, and love. That is the whole framework for all of this. And in researching where all this is coming from, where the COVID stuff is coming from, where the CBDCs are coming from, I got into the exploration of this whole technocracy movement. Technocracy was a term that was coined in 1919. And the idea behind technocracy is that everything is controlled by big business and big government, and that we are not capable of making the best decisions for ourselves. We need to have the best scientists and engineers solving all of our problems. And the only people that can pick those scientists and engineers are the elites. This is literally the framework of this. And then this weaves into progressivism, because the idea of progressivism is that you can perfect man through the application of technology. So this is where all of this comes from. And this was a movement that was gaining steam until there was kind of an internal civil war in 1933, and it collapsed, which also happens to be the year Aldous Huxley wrote A Brave New World. Fast forward 40 years, the Trilateral Commission was formed in 1973 with David Rockefeller and Brzezinski, and the idea behind that was it was built on technocracy. Brzezinski wrote about technocracy. They wanted to create a new international economic order, and in fact pushed and weaved that new international economic order into the UN agenda in 1974. So what you're seeing with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that started in 1974 with this push towards globalism and push towards technocracy. So there are groups behind the scenes: Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, Club of Rome, Council on Foreign Relations. These are groups that you don't see out in the public, but these are the groups that are pushing and driving what's going on. For instance, the Trilateral Commission, every member of Jimmy Carter's cabinet, except for one, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Every president since Jimmy Carter has had multiple members of the Trilateral Commission on their board, in their cabinets and at high levels in their government. And the Trilateral stands for North America, Europe, and Asia. I actually talked to a guy named Patrick Wood, who has written several books on this topic, because while these groups don't report their membership, he has been keeping a database for decades. And he sent it to me. He sent me the full list of everybody that's on, across the country. And you can imagine who's on there: CEO of BlackRock, all of the usual suspects. Jamie Dimon from Chase Bank has been on there at one point. And it's composed of a combination of business elites, people from media, and people from academia. So it's a combination of those things. Those shadow groups then push more public-facing groups, which I'll get to for a second. But there has been always this intent towards one world government. H.G. Wells, who was heavily involved in promoting the idea of the UN to begin with, and was behind the League of Nations, said countless people will hate the New World Order and will die protesting against it. Julian Huxley, who was Aldous Huxley's brother, which is kind of an interesting story. Julian was the first director of the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So he was like the first main scientific person involved with the UN. He was absolutely a eugenicist. I mean, the kinds of policies that he promoted, if you looked at it today, you almost get censored for even talking about the things that he was actually working on and putting forward. So Julian Huxley was quoted as saying, "Political unification in some sort of one world government will be required." So again, this is from a founding member of the UN. To me, and I've encapsulated in the book, 5 main groups that are pushing this global agenda: the UN, the World Bank, the International Monetary Foundation, the World Economic Forum, and the Bank of International Settlements. Now, when you look at those organizations, those 5 organizations employ 60,000 people and have an annual budget of $35 billion. So there is real money, and there are actual full-time people working on pushing this agenda. But beyond that, if you go deeper, if you look at the World Economic Forum, which has 1,000 partner companies plus, just the top 10 WEF companies have a combined market cap of $9 trillion, they employ 6 million people, and they have $1.5 trillion in cash. So one thing, in addition to trying to figure out where did the vaccine passports come from, where does CBDC come from, it all comes from the same source. You can actually see it in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But even the idea that Fortune 500 companies are pushing pronouns in bios comes from the UN and comes from the Sustainable Development Goals, then pushed through WEF member companies. So there is a common thrust here. And the way they're able to implement things like this, the way they're able to implement, mandates and vaccines is through a structure I call organized incompetence, which is the people at the top know what they're doing. But as you go down each level in the organizational structure, people have less and less information. And their livelihood depends on not questioning. So the people at the bottom, are nurses involved in a depopulation scheme and trying to hurt people? No, every nurse that I've ever met has the absolute intent of helping people. So through this structure, they get put into a position where they have certification and their livelihood is dependent upon not knowing what's going on at the level above it, which is a very evil structure because it's very hard to break. It's very hard to convince people who have one intention and think their entire livelihood is focused in one area to find out that there's a 180-degree different actual plan from the top. So if you look at the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they want to control every aspect of human life. They want to control where you live, where you work, what you eat. They want to regulate the land, the air, and the sea. These are built into the Sustainable Development Goals. And as it relates to central bank digital currencies, the UN Secretary General said, central bank digital currencies have the potential to promote financial inclusion and financial stability and to support the achievement of sustainable development goals. So this is a key part of what they're trying to do with UN Agenda 2030. What I did in my free time was I said, well, let's take these 17 sustainable development goals and let's figure out what kind of behavior would they want to track. What kind of behavior would they want to reward and punish? And I don't have the chart that I can show you here, but when you go through that exercise, it comes out looking a lot like the Chinese social credit system. So again, their date is 2030. They're telling us when they want to do this. Everybody's been pushing the idea of singularity. There are all of these things, all of it's focused around 2030. So I guess I'll do the poll again. Did anybody, who believes there's a one world government, agenda for central tyranny? I don't know if anybody changed their mind, but Second Amendment? All right. So next question, do you think there will be a central bank digital currency in the US in less than 5 years? Okay. All right, this will be interesting. And this was surprising to me. So again, I've lived off of crypto since 2019. I follow this stuff. In May of 2020, there were only 35 countries considering CBDCs. So after the COVID stuff started, only 35 countries. Today, 11 countries already have CBDCs. Almost 1 billion people on this planet are already using CBDCs. The countries that are pursuing CBDCs at various phases represent 95% of the global GDP. Every G7 country is developing a CBDC. It's, again, it's 130 countries. It's everywhere, and it has grown at an amazing pace. There's a website called AtlanticCouncil.org where you can actually see a map and see the state of development of CBDCs in every country. But most people are not aware of this. This is not on the radar. And of course, the risks for CBDCs is it's total financial surveillance, complete centralization of power, censorship, complete loss of autonomy, and again, it's the gateway for social credit systems and everything else. So China, they did a pilot, they rolled it out to 261 million people, and now they're rolling it out to the rest of the country. There are a lot of countries in the Eastern Caribbean that have already deployed it. Nigeria didn't work, so Nigeria actually did a CBDC implementation and it failed, which is good news and bad news. It's one of these things where I actually was talking to some people from Nigeria and they were asking me, why did our country implement this? This was when it was still alive. They said there's no demand for it. No, the citizens were not asking for CBDC in Nigeria. In fact, it's difficult to use CBDC in Nigeria from a technical perspective. And I looked into it. Like with a lot of these countries, it's the IMF and the World Bank providing the advice and the funding for these countries to implement central bank digital currencies. And so this is a big part of what this push is. But then the next question is, again, oh, this won't happen in the US. This is the most horrifying part of this to me. On March the 9th, 2022, President Biden signed Executive Order 14067, authorizing the exploration of a CBDC and the regulation of all other digital assets, which, boy, have they been doing that. But the part that people are unaware of is there have already been 3 successful CBDC pilots in the United States. The technology already works. When you see the chair of the Federal Reserve on TV and he says, well, we don't even know if we're looking at it yet, they have done 3 successful pilots. And by the way, this sounds like a conspiracy theory. All 3 of the pilots had funding from the MIT Multimedia Lab and actually had funding ties to Jeffrey Epstein. You actually can't make this stuff up, but that's exactly, it's true, and I outlined the details in my book. The first CBDC pilot is called Project Hamilton, and this is a pilot that will replace the cash that we use in our day-to-day lives. This pilot, which they did from 2020 to 2022, is capable of handling 1.7 million transactions per second. To give you a sense, the current financial system can handle about 100,000 transactions per second at the most. So their successful pilot can do more transactions than our existing system. And in the conclusion, they said, the technology works, we just have to figure out the legality and how to market it. Which again, to me, which we'll get to, is this is what emergencies are for. We always get this kind of stuff in an emergency. The second pilot is called Project Cedar, and this is a CBDC for banks communicating and transferring money amongst themselves. That successful pilot was completed, and then there's a third pilot, which is even more sinister than any of the others, but they gave it, and you can tell because they gave it a really bland name. They called it Regulated Liability Network. The idea behind Regulated Liability Network is it's one database basically for tracking all CBDCs and all other digital assets so that you can have one or multiple agencies monitoring and censoring different CBDCs and other digital assets. And let me explain what this digital asset might be. You might create a token that represents everything that you buy. This computer might be tokenized and tracked on this regulated liability network. So if all of a sudden the government decides they don't like what you're saying, your social credit score drops, not only can they shut off your money, they can shut off your assets and your ability to even sell physical things to the extent that they're tokenized and you can only buy and sell things using CBDC. So this regulated liability network thing is a disaster, which again is why they gave it such a boring name, but it has MIT involved, it has the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, it has the big New York banks involved, it has the Bank of International Settlements involved. Then in July of last year, they implemented something called FedNow, which is a new infrastructure for banks. So I mean, you know, if you send a check out of state or whatever, it may take 10 days, 7 days to clear, it takes a while for even payroll to clear. If you send a wire transfer, it may still not get there same day and it's really expensive. So they put in place an infrastructure that allows for instantaneous payments between banks. This is, to me, the infrastructure on top of which they will put a CBDC, and they started rolling it out last July. So if there's an emergency and they want to implement CBDC, the technical capacity and infrastructure is there, and again, Biden has already put forward this executive order. So now, do you think there will be a CBDC in the US in less than 5 years? That change anybody's mind? Let me see, I thought I had this in here. We will get these things in an emergency. The reason that I'm expressing urgency about this is I did run for president, and I'm sure none of you heard about it. It was fascinating to see, as the only unvaccinated Republican candidate. I would have thought it would have gotten, even if it's just like this is a tinfoil hat guy. I didn't even get that. But I did have an opportunity to talk to other presidential candidates. I have talked to Vivek several times. He's read my book. I've given my book to several other candidates. I was on a panel I've spoken to Ted Cruz, Warren Davidson, a bunch of people in Congress. And Ted Cruz has been leading the charge in the Senate to stop CBDCs. And he said it's stopped dead. He said the U.S. Senate, as it's currently composed, will not stop CBDCs. There isn't the willingness to do it or even the understanding. And he said, furthermore, based on how the election is looking right now, he thinks that there's a real possibility that Elizabeth Warren will become the chair of the Finance Committee. Now, if you see Elizabeth Warren's comments, she has been, just within the last 2 weeks, publicly saying we need a CBDC. She is actually pushing it, she's promoting it, and she's putting in legislation around this. So this is a real threat. And even in the House, there's very little resistance for this. So we're at a weak point. So to me, and this is a very easy scenario, there's a terrorist attack on American soil. Automatically, everybody in a bipartisan way says, oh, you know, cryptocurrency is used for terrorism and money laundering. Cash is used for terrorism and money laundering. To keep us all safe, we need CBDC, and it'll get bipartisan support. Just like the Patriot Act was passed, I think, a couple of months after 9/11. TARP was passed a couple of weeks after Lehman Brothers failed, and the $2.2 trillion CARES Act passed, you know, in a few days after COVID was declared a pandemic on a voice vote. This is why I'm not optimistic about a political solution. There are people in Congress that voted for the Patriot Act and TARP and CARES. They're still there. So this is why this is an urgent situation. Do you think the dollar will lose its status as the global reserve currency within 5 years? Okay, this is a smart crowd, so I'll speed up through some of this, but there's a guy named Mike Hewitt who did an analysis of 750 fiat currencies. His conclusion, every fiat currency in human history has failed. The average fiat currency only lasts 27 years. And if you look at why they fail because of excessive debt, economic mismanagement, political instability, hyperinflation, loss of confidence, currency competition, war, and conflict. We have all 7. So we already know in World War I in Germany, people were carrying around, you know, wheelbarrows full of cash, and then they would come back and the wheelbarrow was gone. Zimbabwe famously had their $50 trillion bill. Again, if insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, then clearly fiat currency doesn't work. It's failed thousands of times, and we haven't really innovated on it in any way. But then there are some people that will say, well, yes, but we're the global reserve currency. Well, the previous 5 global reserve currencies lasted for an average of 94 years. We've been the global reserve currency for 103 years. So even that argument of, well, we're the dominant player. I'm not going to go into detail about the Federal Reserve other than to say it's, you know, it's not federal, it doesn't have any reserves. It's effectively a Ponzi scheme. And the dollar has gone from a gold standard set at $20.67 per ounce to FDR arbitrarily trading it, changing it to $35 an ounce, to then Nixon abandoning the gold standard altogether in 1971, to banks in 1992 being required to hold at least 10% of customer deposits in reserves. That's it. It's fractional reserve. You have to have 10% of customer deposits in reserves. So if people wanted to withdraw their cash, based on the analysis, at least 10% of it was there. Thanks to COVID, there are 0 bank reserve requirements. 0. They got rid of it. So your bank, the money is not safe in the bank. And obviously, I know here in California, there were several bank failures earlier in the year. But think about this picture. So the bank doesn't have any reserves. So in order to be able to satisfy withdrawal requests, where are they getting their money? Well, commercial loans that are tanking, residential loans that are tanking, student loans that have started up again, which I think already have a 46% default rate. So this banking system is in really bad shape. And the thing is, they know about it. And in fact, this is kind of a controlled demolition. So, because a lot of people, when I get into the solution to this, I say, well, take your money out of the bank, not just take the cash out, because it's the underlying fiat currency that's the problem. Exchange your dollars for crypto, gold, and silver and start using it for day-to-day transactions. And like, well, that will speed up this process. No, they already have a timetable for this process. The only way we win is to actually have enough people out in a parallel economy so that everybody doesn't get forced into CBDC. The dollar's lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1913. The FDIC doesn't have enough in its reserve fund. It actually already ran out early last year with those bank collapses, so then they just tax the banks to replenish the fund, which is why you get 0.01% interest keeping your money in the bank, and they charge 30% interest on credit cards. In a poll of Americans now, it's something like 50, over half of Americans are now worried about the safety of the money in the banks, which is absolutely an all-time high. We have BRICS, we have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then now there are 10 members, including Saudi Arabia and UAE, that have joined. This is becoming a powerhouse. They're moving to abandoning the dollar and possibly creating their own currency backed by gold. And it's estimated that by 2030, the BRICS nations will surpass the West in terms of share of GDP. So that threat is there, and already the dollar is only used in 58% of global transactions versus 74% just in 1980. So again, we've hit all 7 of the reasons that a fiat currency fails. Now I'm going to go into the next part of this. So all right, CBDC, the technology is here. They want to implement it. In my opinion, they're just waiting for an emergency. The dollar's collapsing. There really isn't a political solution. Based on who it looks like is likely to be the front runners on both sides, neither of the front runners are anti-CBDC. That's an unfortunate fact. Trump has not spoken out on this issue, but he was not great on this issue last time. So realistically, the 2024 election's probably not going to change this. Who knows? But I certainly wouldn't want to count on that. So how many people here have crypto? Or have used crypto? Okay, some. Well, I'll give a quote by the creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto. He said, "The root problem with conventional currency is that all trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust." Again, as I mentioned, there's no political solution. I've been close to political activism actually for 30 years. My stepmother was the co-chair of the RNC from 2012 to 2016, was actually ambassador to Costa Rica under Trump. But I've seen politics from when she started as a precinct captain in Broward County, Florida, all the way up. And I mean, my view on politics now, even after having spent all this time, is kind of abandon all hope, ye who enter here. We really need to, start talking about direct action, radical noncompliance, and boycotts. Because boycotts work. We saw that with Bud Light. We saw that with Target. But it's difficult for me, even though I've lived off of crypto, to even talk about this topic. And the reason that it's difficult is I'm not just up here saying buy crypto. It's crypto, gold, and silver. It's alternative assets, so don't look at this as just, oh, he's up here trying to shill crypto. I know this is a difficult conversation to have. Why? Because 99% of all cryptocurrencies are scams. There are like 20,000 coins out there. They're mostly Ponzi schemes. They're mostly junk. That's true. The mainstream media is just propaganda designed to push the official narrative, which is that cryptocurrency is bad. They want to help usher in CBDCs. But the truth is, most people don't even think about crypto as money. Most people now just think about it as a speculative investment. I mean, this is what's going on now. Everybody's talking about when is there going to be a Bitcoin ETF. The idea of a Bitcoin ETF is absurd. Bitcoin is supposed to be a replacement for money. Why would you have the thing that you use to buy things on a day-to-day basis in a financial instrument managed by BlackRock that you can only buy through Goldman Sachs? That's not a replacement for money. And so this is tough because you have all these people that already have Bitcoin and they're like, well, we just want the price to go up. And so this has been complicated. And even within the realm of cryptos that could serve as a replacement for money, there's more division in crypto that makes politics look like a church choir. I mean, it's unbelievable. So that's the tough part of this, because most people are out there selling their particular thing. But at the heart of crypto and blockchain technology is the idea that it's a form of money that's fixed in supply, where you're keeping track of transactions on a ledger, and that ledger is audited every 10 minutes. You basically have computers all over the world solving math problems, and the one that solves that math problem is the one that adds the batch of transactions in that 10-minute window to the chain. So this way, you can't write over the database. The database is permanent. Everybody has a copy of the database, and you have different people competing to figure out who's going to add the next block of transactions. It truly is a revolution in money, because again, fiat currency hasn't worked. The idea behind Bitcoin in the white paper is to have peer-to-peer cash that people can use all over the world, that's fast, cheap, easy to use, and has no government or third party in the middle. That's the revolution of crypto, which is not what 99% of the projects are. So my guidance on this is, and again, this is in the book, avoid projects that are centralized, that don't have this, it's called proof of work model, where computers are trying to solve these math problems, but where it's an elite group of people that determine which transactions get added. Or anything that even has a corporate structure, because that can be shut down very easily by the government. And it leaves you with only like a handful of cryptos: Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Ravencoin, Litecoin, and then two others that are privacy coins, Zcash and Monero. And again, I'll talk about that more offline, but I've been living off of this stuff for 2019. It's not convenient, and it's not easy, but it is possible, and it's good to know that it's possible. I have a friend that's lived off of crypto since 2015. So it's good to know you can conduct business and buy and sell things without banks and without the government. That is a huge step to preserving liberty. And these are more details, but I mentioned that CBDC pilot that can do 1.7 million transactions per second. Current financial system can do 100,000. Bitcoin can only do 7 transactions per second. So there are issues with this, which is why I suggest a number of cryptocurrencies, because combined they actually right now could be an actual substitute for money. I want to talk about the importance of self-custody. Self-custody matters whether it's crypto or gold or silver. In fact, it even matters with cash. I wouldn't feel comfortable, I wouldn't leave any more money in the bank than you're willing to lose. And I would say the same thing with crypto or gold. If you've seen all of these failures of exchanges, whether it's FTX or Binance, which has been fined $4 billion and their CEO was arrested, or Mt. Gox, or I mean, there are documentaries on these things now about how this works. Almost all of them have turned out to be either hacked or they were a deliberate Ponzi scheme. So when you are buying crypto, you want to buy it and make sure that you take it into your own custody in your own wallet. Again, this is personal for me, because the person who introduced me to Bitcoin is now spending 8 years in federal prison for selling Bitcoin. And my other friend in New Hampshire, who had his business destroyed. So I've seen this happen just in the process of writing this book and starting to talk about this. So as someone who's living inside this world, the part of Biden's executive order, which is the regulation of digital assets, they've been moving on that aggressively, which what that should tell you is, because you might say, well, let's wait and see what the government does before I buy crypto. The government wants to replace your cash, and they want to replace crypto, and they want to give you CBDC. If you wait to see what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. You can act now and play around with it and take some, get some crypto now, and then play with it and see how it works as you move forward. But they have this Operation Choke Point. So the SEC is suing all of the crypto exchanges. The Signature and Silvergate bank failures are really interesting. They're interesting because of this fact. Both Silvergate and Signature Bank had a competitive offering to FedNow. So I mentioned that FedNow infrastructure that the Federal Reserve, those two banks had a competitive offering. So it looks like the run on those banks might have actually been pushed intentionally to remove the competitors to FedNow, which frees up the rollout of CBDC. Furthermore, I can't remember which one it was. I think the purchaser of Silvergate Bank was Mellon Bank, and in the deal, they were told whoever bought Silvergate couldn't get into crypto for at least 5 years. So there was some really shady stuff going on with those deals. And as I already mentioned, this ETF and all of this other push, but now, if you do a Bitcoin or a crypto transaction for more than $10,000, you have to and are required to fill out an IRS form, or it's a felony. Here's the problem. They haven't created the form. So another friend of mine who runs a Bitcoin foundation, he has an event every year. He's been doing this for 10 years. He can't take crypto for his crypto event for the first time in 10 years because he's required to fill out a form, and if he doesn't fill it out, it's a felony, and they haven't created the form. This is the level of what's going on behind the scenes with crypto regulation. Gold, same thing. I have, this isn't going to be easy to display, but have you guys heard of gold backs? Yeah. All right, so I buy and sell these things with these in New Hampshire all of the time. This is 1/1000th of an ounce of gold. So it has actual gold in it. So they've figured out a way so that you can use actual gold in day-to-day transactions. And of course you can use silver as well. I have 1/10 ounce silver and silver rounds. So these things can be used. And in New Hampshire, we're pretty out there in New Hampshire, but there are multiple businesses that have been taking crypto and that take gold backs for quite some time. And in fact, today I was supposed to testify on a bill in New Hampshire making gold and silver legal tender in New Hampshire. There's a group that is going around to state legislatures trying to push that. And so hopefully that will happen in California as well. It's important, though, even with gold, you have to focus on self-custody. If you buy gold and have it stored somewhere else, you're absolutely at risk. And the book goes into a whole history of the categories of scams within the gold market. But the biggest scam in the gold market of all is FDR and gold confiscation, which happened in 1933. And what's interesting about that, though, is so if you had your gold in a bank vault or some other third-party hosted solution, your gold was confiscated. And about 75% of the gold was confiscated. But if you had your gold at home in your own possession, unless you voluntarily turned it in, you kept your gold. So self-custody is always important. And at a point where all of our institutions are crumbling from an ethics standpoint, whether it's financial institutions or governmental institutions, in this environment of distrust, self-custody is definitely the way to go. So, Henry Ford once said, "It's well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." And hopefully that's true, and hopefully we can get the word out on this. But I want to just stress, again, as I conclude, the urgency on this. The CBDC is here. 130 countries are looking at it. 11 have already deployed it. 1 billion people, roughly, already are on CBDC. All of these global groups, the UN, WEF, et cetera, are pushing it. There's coordination amongst those groups to push this. It's all part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And to me, stopping this, vote, not vote, again, I'm very skeptical of what the outcome is going to be there, but you can start using crypto, gold, and silver for day-to-day transactions today, and it doesn't take a large percentage of us to do that to gum up the works, because fiat currency is so, it's crumbling so fast. The banks are in such bad shape that if 2 or 3% of us do this, it will actually stop them in their tracks. And so, in terms of what you can do, I'm recommending you buy my book because there's a lot of material here. This just scratched the surface. I wrote it because people would ask the individual questions. I'm like, no, you have to understand the whole thing. You have to know who's behind this, what the threat is if we don't stop this, and then it goes into specific details of how to buy crypto. There's actually a how-to guide, where to do it, how to set up a wallet, how to buy gold, how to buy silver, how to evaluate all of those things. So I recommend you do that and test it out. I'm actually creating a 4-hour workshop that I'm going to be doing. The purpose of it is so that it's an expanded version of this presentation, but at the end of the presentation, everybody walks out with crypto, gold, and silver in their physical possession. Because to me, the biggest barrier is, I can give a talk like this and people can be afraid and all riled up, and then and then it adds more stress because they're like, oh, I don't even know how to do this. So now I've made a bad situation even worse. So my goal is to actually help people to actually take action. And then lastly, you can follow me on social media. I'm at Aaron R. Day on Twitter, and I'm going to be putting out podcasts every couple of weeks with interviews related to all of these topics, because this is a moving subject. I mean, even I've already done a new revision of the book, but all of these pieces are changing, and you just have to stay on top of it. So I'm going to do that by putting out regular content through the Brownstone Institute and doing these regular podcasts. So with that, happy to take questions.
How do you pay your babysitter?
Well, the way you can pay your babysitters, you can actually use debit cards. You can use crypto to buy debit cards, and then you can use the debit cards to pay for those things.
You can pay your babysitter with a debit card. Okay.
Yeah,
So I'm going to...
At this point, I mean, most kids that's not an uncommon thing. Most kids are not familiar with cash.
That's probably true.
Unfortunately.
That's probably true. Aaron, I'm just going to ask that you keep looking at the camera. I know it's polite of you to look at me, but we don't want to have you on the side of your face. By the way, this is Aaron's book. He's going to have it available just for only $20 after the event, and he and Eileen will be selling them at the table. So let's dig right into this. Given the disastrous rollout of the Obamacare experience and all the frustration with their technology, what could we imagine if the government and intermediaries initiated CBDCs?
Well, I mean, I think you would be looking at, well, there's the question, how would they do it, or what would it look like after they did it?
What would it look like after they did it? Because remember, it was supposed to be all so smooth, and it wasn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Obamacare website was obviously a disaster. In this particular case, I think the technical rollout would be better because they've already been doing it. So FedNow is actually the first stage in it, and the people that were working on the technology on the pilot are through the MIT lab and all of those other people. Those were not the same people that were working on the Obamacare website. So I do think they would be able to technically roll it out. It's what happens once they roll it out that's the problem.
Here's a question from the audience. Is it possible that cryptos are a psyops?
Well, anything could be a psyop. I would not want to stand up and say definitively one way or another about anything. And this is a big contested issue to go into a lot of detail. I actually think we know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, but that's very controversial, and my opinion on that is not in the mainstream. But there's going to be there's a lawsuit going on right now called COPA versus Craig Stephen Wright, and it might be shown that Craig Wright is the creator of Bitcoin, in which case I think it's probably not a psyop. But of course, who knows? Okay.
So here's another question already from the audience. A cyber attack is predicted to occur as soon as this year. Given the risk of crypto being wiped out, how would you manage that risk?
Well, I mean, if there's a wide cyber attack, or if we lose the electrical grid for 90 days, then we're going to be talking about things like how to deal with cannibalism. I mean, seriously, this is a bigger issue. I think that there are things that you can do with crypto because it's decentralized. You could create mesh networks, and there are ways that actually certain cryptos, might still work. But if we're talking about a sustained grid being down, we have much more survivalist-related issues to deal with.
I don't know about you guys, but did you ever think you'd be at a meeting on a Tuesday night in Mountain View and you'd hear of Jeffrey Epstein and cannibalism in the same presentation?
But actually, to further answer that, this is why crypto, gold, and silver. Like, don't do just all of one. I mean, because of the uncertainty, it's good to take kind of a balanced approach and just start dabbling with it. I'm not going to claim, even though I live off of this stuff, that I have the best solution or ability to pick or have a crystal ball. You've got to kind of play with it and stay up to date on what's going on. Okay.
Can you explain a little bit more about this 2 to 3% solution? Like, how would it actually gum up the works, as you said?
Well, the banking system is going to collapse anyway. That is kind of that is the default situation right now. And I didn't go through all the charts and everything that I have, but if you look at it right now, the banks are in an absolute horrible situation, and they know that. If enough people can set up an alternative, then you can actually have people operating a parallel economy and be in a situation where not everybody is forced to use CBDC. It's kind of like with vaccines. I mean, whatever, 80% were vaccinated, but there was still that 20% that resisted. I think if you had a 2 to 3% number, which is generally the number that it takes for, you know, kind of a revolutionary change to take place, kind of historically, if you look at other movements.
Okay. Next question is, when you buy something with gold, silver, or Bitcoin, how do you determine how much gold, silver, or Bitcoin to pay?
Well, there are markets and there's real-time pricing for crypto, gold, and silver. So you know what the equivalent dollar value is for those alternative assets. And at some point when the dollar collapses, things might start actually being expressed in gold or silver or crypto. But for right now, there are real-time charts that show the equivalent dollar value for each of those three.
So, Aaron, I think that the seduction is really the sort of the honey is the convenience, right? Because younger people basically are happy to swipe their hand over a monitor at Whole Foods, right? As opposed to the 90-year-old who's at the counter with her purse about to write her check and everybody's head's about to pop off, right? So is there any hope that the younger people are being educated about what they're actually participating in? Is this another example where we have not been given, kind of like the vaccines, where there's no real informed consent?
Well, there's certainly no informed consent, and I've thought about this a lot, because early on I'm like, well, maybe young people will be early adopters for this. But what you said is exactly true. We know there's indoctrination in the schools. I mean, in fact, people are realizing that this, I find it funny, we know this in public schools, and now all of a sudden people are understanding that, oh, it didn't stop at public schools. It applies to Harvard and all of the top universities as well. I don't have a magic ball to undo 40 years of indoctrination. But the other issue with this is, younger people don't have any money. To be honest, boomers have, I think, 53% of the net worth of the country. So in reality, the best target market for making this change is actually going to be for older folks, and then hope we can, start to educate. I saw there was a Cato poll that came out that I think 35% of Gen Z would be okay with government cameras in the house to monitor for domestic abuse. So I don't know how to fix that. Go for early adopters, and that's not where it's going to be.
So a couple of people want to know if cash is going to totally disappear. Is it just going to be gone?
Yes. Yes, they absolutely want cash because they can't monitor your transactions. And again, they will use security and fear. It will be, we have to stop money laundering. We have to stop terrorists. You're not safe. And cash, that's the excuse they'll use. But yeah, they want cash gone.
Okay. And
tied it with what?
They tied it with COVID, trying to say that the dollars were dirty.
Oh, yeah.
because we were going to spread germs on the dollar. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many of you got COVID from the $20 bill? Yeah. Okay. So why MIT? Why are the three, I don't know if you call them beta tests, but whatever the appropriate language is, why is it MIT?
Well, I mean, obviously MIT is fairly on the cutting edge for technology, and it was this one guy, Joy Ito, who was the chair of this multimedia lab, who received substantial funding through Epstein and Bill Gates also. So that's where the money is, and that's where the technical development talent is. I mean, I guess, you know, FTX is Stanford, so.
Okay. So you mentioned cannibalism.
That's not my
I can't believe I've said that twice in one night.
That's not my core area, but go ahead.
Okay, well, let's go for it. It's not my central area of expertise either. I wouldn't have a clue about the seasoning. So what happens when an economy collapses, like what in America, what would that look like, beginning, middle, and I think people have a hard time imagining that could actually happen here, even though we hear about it in other countries.
Well, I mean, it's happened in other countries. I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed, Yugoslavia collapsed, Argentina actually arguably collapsed last year. They had 100% monthly inflation, and now they have a new president, and we'll see what happens. They're increasing their interest rates to 75% and devaluing their currency. But certainly, countries have collapsed before. I guess the question is what reemerges, and that depends on a variety of factors that I can't predict. But it could be cannibalism, or it could be, which is one thing I've been arguing for, that we need to actually start a kind of an America 2.0 project where people are starting to talk about rebuilding from first principles again. So I think that needs to happen. But we could get that, or we could get cannibalism, or we could get something in between. I don't have a crystal ball.
You mentioned your work in the Free State Project. Do you want to describe that a little bit and tell the folks what's happening? And if anybody wants to move to New Hampshire, I think that the days would help you pack.
Yeah, no, so I moved there in 2008. The idea behind the Free State Project is to make it the liberty destination on planet Earth. And it was picked through a selection process because, well, the state motto is live free or die already. So it's already kind of leaning towards liberty. But it's a small state with 1.3 million people. Our state legislature has 424 people in it. So we have a 400-person House and a 24-person Senate. So for a population of 1.3 million, we have a government structure that is as large as basically the United States, the DC Congress, which means you have access to your candidates and you can affect things at a grassroots level, in theory. And Free Staters right now, I think, make up, or Free Staters with people that align with Free Staters, make up 100 out of the 400 members of the State House, and we have our first state senator as well, and the majority leader is a Free Stater. So huge impact, because there are really only like 5,000 Free Staters that have actually moved. The goal was to get 20,000. 20,000 people signed a pledge saying that they would move, and I think a little over 5,000 have already moved. So it's tremendous impact that 5,000 people can get elected and control 1/4 of the state legislature.
It sounds very different than California, doesn't it? It's kind of hard to imagine. There's a question about hacking. Are digital wallets safe?
It's like everything else. It depends on the digital wallet, and it depends on the cryptocurrency that you're using. I put some recommendations in for starting as to what wallet to use, but that's actually a really complex question. But if you're buying the right cryptocurrencies and you're using the right wallets, it's safe. But there are a lot of scams.
Okay.
So you have to do your homework.
I think this might be a technical question, but maybe you can explain this. What about wholesale-only central bank digital currency? And is that the camel's nose under the tent, or is that any better?
Oh, it isn't any better. This is just for banks sending large transactions to one another. I mean, the way banks work is ridiculous. Basically, you have each bank that has its own database and its way of tracking money, and then you have all these different protocols for how that money is sent back and forth, and it's really expensive. I mean, this is why for, people that work in the United States and, are sending money back to their family in other countries, the transaction fees involved in doing that, in dealing with banks or even dealing with Western Union, are absolutely outrageous. The wholesale central bank digital currency makes it more or less, or at least moving forward, instantaneous, and makes it able for international commerce to happen in real time and at less cost. But of course, it's going to be at the expense of everybody's liberty.
How well does crypto support anonymity?
Depends on the crypto, and it depends on how you use the crypto. But there is a big misunderstanding about Bitcoin, and part of this is, and I'm using just that one as an example, but because it's the largest one, there's this idea that Bitcoin is anonymous. It's absolutely not anonymous. It's a public ledger that all of the transactions are stored on. So when a government official or somebody from the mainstream media says, we've got to crack down on all of these bad transactions that are going on through Bitcoin, well, you know what they are. They're there. You know, when the CIA is selling illegal drugs to fund arms projects, they're not using Bitcoin because that's tracked, right? They're going to be using cash. So that one is not anonymous. There are cryptocurrencies like Monero and Zcash, which are privacy coins, which work in a completely different way that are anonymous, or claim to be.
I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but one of our audience members asks, how do you see the real role of the British financial empire in all of this?
I don't know. I don't know if I have a specific intelligent answer to say about that.
Okay.
I don't have, yeah.
One of my favorite answers from our speakers is, I don't know, you know, because we appreciate,
I can't speak intelligently
your
about
honestly.
I can't speak intelligently about it. I understand kind of the history of the British banking system, and then there are a lot of theories about how things work that may or may not be true, which is why I don't want to talk about it, because it's not really knowledge that is in the realm of more of theory to me.
Okay, appreciate that. Next question is, what do you think the plan from the one world government folks is with our homes, our land, our investment properties? What's their plan for our property?
So this idea of technocracy really is about elites controlling every aspect of our lives. There is no such thing as property rights. There are no individual rights under a technocratic system. So it's not just well, how are they going to slide this in? They don't believe in the Constitution. They don't believe in these rights. This is a true top-down system.
Okay. So I got a funny notice. I shouldn't have gotten the notice, but I got a notice that should have gone to a relative of mine. We're saying that she needed to be careful because the safety deposit boxes were no longer going to allow heavy materials in them. I presumed that was coins and drugs, or coins and guns they were telling you that you shouldn't keep in your safety deposit boxes. So my question, or I think dovetail with this question is you talked about self-storage being risky, and this question asks, how about non-bank storage?
Yeah, well,
what does that look like?
Well, I'm recommending non-bank storage, and there are.
Is that in the soles of your shoes, or where are we going to put this?
Safety deposit boxes are not safe. I mean, there are already examples now of the FBI getting in there. That has already been cracked, and we already know from FDR and gold confiscation, I would not consider a safety deposit box to be safe. There are things that you can do in terms of your own safes, your own storage for storing things like, you know, precious metals. I mean, obviously, unless you've got, it's probably unlikely people are going to have rooms filled with gold. Gold is fairly, you know, dense and high value. You can figure out a variety of different ways to conceal that. In crypto, that's the beauty of crypto. Crypto doesn't take up any space. At the end of the day, it's just, can you remember 12 words and keep those safe somewhere? And there are a variety of ways of doing that, and there are a whole variety of implementations for hardware wallets for crypto, and there's a whole, again, I could do talks on each one of those things, but there are answers, and the research and exploration is required on an individual basis.
Mm-hmm. Some of our audience members are concerned about you. Is the IRS auditing you and Eileen every year?
No.
No.
I've never been audited. Well, great, but you know, I just.
Thanks for caring. I want to share.
I'll check back in a year.
Okay, check back in a year, and you can definitely blame us. Okay.
Well, actually, on that topic, but you know, I'm not avoiding taxes either, to be clear. So there's some other aspects to this with tax treatment. You know, if you hold crypto for more than a year, then it becomes long-term capital gains, and so there are things to consider when you're buying and using crypto from a tax perspective. And I consider those things, and recommend other people consider those things as well.
Okay. Is there any difference between the way credit unions and U.S. banks handle the crypto business or the currency business?
I mean, it's all based on fiat, so at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. At the root of this is actual fiat currency itself. So moving from a bank to a credit union doesn't solve the underlying fact that our currency is printed out of thin air, backed by nothing, and distributed through these systems, whether they're credit unions or banks. And what you're already seeing is a consolidation towards larger and larger banks. JP Morgan Chase now, you're only supposed, one bank is only supposed to be able to have 10% of US bank deposits, and JP Morgan Chase already has an exemption and is already beyond that level anyway. So there's already a big consolidation towards banks. I don't think credit unions are going to get wiped out through regulation and a variety of other things probably as this goes on.
Okay, a couple of proper nouns here, and I'm not sure everybody knows what these are, but if you want to comment. Is Coinbase safe at this point? What do you think of Dinar and Nazara? I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Nazara?
I think Nazara is fake.
Can you explain what that is? Because I don't know what it is, and I bet you I'm not the only one.
There are these ideas that came out from, I think, the 90s. A politician, floated some idea, well, there's something that's turned into a conspiracy theory that all of the debt is going to be wiped out in one fell swoop, and we're going to have a debt jubilee and bring in a whole new system. And people are pushing that. I think that is a psyop. There are a lot of people pushing. And actually even tied to the Q movement that are pushing things that are actually more towards a CBDC and these centralized systems, and Nazara and Gisara are some of the things that they're using to entice people in this direction. This idea that all of your debt is going to be forgiven and that white hats are going to come in and usher in a new currency and everything's going to be great.
It's getting complicated, isn't it?
The other part of the question was about Coinbase. So you have to buy crypto somewhere. So if you buy crypto through Coinbase, take it off immediately. Don't keep any crypto on any exchange. The history, I've onboarded, I don't know, over 1,000 people personally, even before I started doing this, to crypto. And so it was like a one-on-one process every time. And the one thing I say is, not your keys, not your coins. If you don't have your crypto in your possession, in your wallet, it's not yours and you can lose it. And I would say probably half the people have lost some or all of their crypto because most of the exchanges, since crypto's been around, have gone under.
So, Aaron, you wrote from your website that this was your campaign. These were your campaign ideas. No to fake money and Ponzi schemes. No to public health depopulation agenda. No to masks. No to bioweapons, masked as vaccines. No to public nutrition guidelines that make us fat, sick, and unable to reproduce. No to being programmed by mainstream media manipulated by the American deep state. No to the indoctrinations of our children in government schools. No to censorship of free speech through unholy alliance of big tech and government surveillance. Yes?
Yeah, I don't know why that wasn't popular. Well, when I originally started, the idea was, I didn't realize I was going to be focused just on CBDC. The core of all of those themes is boycott the system. In 2020, when COVID started, I put out a series of videos and was doing live streams where I'm like, they're going to start censoring content. So I was explaining to people, stop using text messaging, use Signal, stop using YouTube, use Odyssey, because you're not going to be able to communicate to anyone. And within a week, I was shadow banned. And so I was right, but it didn't matter. But if you look at all those things, yeah, take your kids out of public school, stop following public health. Public health is they're trying to kill you. I mean, there's no other way to describe it, and it's not just vaccines. So exit the dollar. Exit the schools, turn off the TV, all of it. We can do that. We don't need to vote.
So I'm going to call this the cocktail meeting, because I know everybody in here needs a drink after this one. I also know that you're grown-ups and you came here to hear things that are disturbing. You came here to hear the truth. You came here to wake up and be part of the solution so that we actually can pass on the baton of liberty. Aaron says that protecting our freedom starts with we the people saving ourselves by standing up and saying no. With nonviolent resistance as our foundation, we can start to reclaim our power, our freedom, and our nation. Aaron, we are so thrilled that you were with us tonight. Thank you so much for a really stimulating presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.